Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. And a warm welcome to the afternoon show. I'm Bill Arnold, and must say this is one of my favorite times of the year. And now I am so glad to have Ace Collins join me on the program today because it's become a tradition with he and I as we talk about some of the stories behind the best loved songs of Christmas. And a little bit later on in the month, we're going to talk about some of the best loved traditions of Christmas. But today we're going to talk music, which I just love. I heard Hark, the Herald Angels yesterday, and there's in line 3 of the verse, born to give us second birth. They're just not writing songs the way they used to. I think that was all the way from 1739 or something, but I'm sure Ace will have all the backstories on it. So glad to have him on. You can learn more about him at acecollins.com. Ace, welcome. I think you're there. Pretty sure he's there. Maybe you're muted. But let's try one more time. All right, Wyatt. We're going to just give him a second to connect. If you don't own a copy of this book, this needs to be part of your Christmas collection of things that come out every Christmas, and put it on the coffee table, because everybody, Christian or non-Christian, are familiar with these songs. And if they pick it up and page through and see one of the songs and read one of the short stories associated with it, they will realize that there's a great depth behind each one of these songs. And the backstories on these songs are amazing. And when we think of all of our favorite songs of Christmas, and when we think of how much music means to us, especially at Christmas time, you will make for a great conversationalist if you know some of these stories behind these great songs. So, Ace, I think we had a little bit of a technological problem, but I think you're here now, aren't you?
I'm here. Yes, I am.
Terrific. Now, before we start, I want to hear a little bit about the high drama to your day.
I almost didn't make the interview. I decided I had enough time between interviews to go out and drive my 1934 Auburn, and I ran out of gas. And so I had to run back to the house and get 2 gallons of gas that I had in my gas can and pour it in there to drive it home. So that was a little embarrassing. The gas gauge probably quit working on that 90-year-old car 80 years ago.
Okay.
And so I always check it with a broom handle before I go, and I forgot to check it with the broom handle today to know that I was low on gas. So, driving a 90-year-old family heirloom and turning it into a disaster almost. But it's home. It's sitting in the garage. It's happy again, and so am I.
And tell me the make and model again.
1934 Auburn. They were made in Auburn, Indiana.
Okay.
They were part of the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Company. Mine is one of 27 that is known left. There were 4,444 of them. They were the cars of movie stars. Mine, though, has the original interior and the original paint. All the mechanics are original. It's never been rebuilt. So mine is an original, unrestored 1934 Auburn.
Wow. And you've got
I think it's the only 1934 Auburn 652Y sedan left unrestored in the world that's running.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was listening to Hark, the Herald Angels yesterday, and in verse 3 it says, born to raise us from the earth, born to give us second birth. And for some reason, I've sung that a million times, but yesterday I just got goosebumps because that's why he came. To give us life.
That's true. And the writer of those lyrics, Charles Wesley, would have hated the way we sing that song now.
Why?
Because he did not write it with the Hark the Herald Angels Sing, because he felt that was completely and totally biblically inaccurate. It was the heavenly host, and the English word at that time for heavenly host were Velkin, and they didn't sing, they rang. And so he wrote it, Hark the heavenly Velkin rang.
Oh, wow.
And so when they match that to Mendelssohn's tune celebrating the development of the printing press, an old tune as well, which Mendelssohn was dead. He probably wouldn't have liked being matched to another writer's lyrics either. And they changed the lyrics to "Hark the Heavenly Angels Sing," thinking it sounded better, and a lot of people didn't know what Velkin were. And so it's a song that I heard yesterday in church, and I was thinking, in my mind, I was actually kind of singing it, "Hark the Heavenly Velkin Ring," because
D-
of knowing the story behind it and knowing how Wesley would want it to have been sung. Yeah.
yeah, but Velkin doesn't really roll off your tongue, does it?
No, and people pretty much have lost the meaning of Velkin over the years. But if you look back biblically, it is heavenly host. It is not angels in this particular case. And, supposedly, from what I've studied, heavenly host and angels are different things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's a beautiful song, though, and it is one of those songs that I always like hearing and singing every year. And I don't think there's anything quite like music that gets me recalibrated quickly for any particular season. Christmas music tunes me right in.
Christmas is a time machine.
Yeah,
It is the only time of the year that we go back and revive traditions and songs. And, you think about this now. Bing Crosby charted over 400 times, yet very few of us remember any of his massive hit songs in the 30s and 40s. Yet every Christmas he comes back to us with at least four of his hits because they were Christmas hits.
right.
We would have totally forgotten probably who Perry Como was without Christmas. How many people can name Brenda Lee's top hits, yet everybody can talk about "Rocking Around the Christmas Tree," which actually hit number one for the first time last year and hit number one again the other day, I think.
Wow.
And so she recorded it at 14, but didn't hit number one until she was drawing Social Security. That's a long way between recording a song and actually hitting number one with it. But those songs come back, as do the hymns, as do the carols. And they take us back to a time, whenever I hear "Old Holy Night," I'm back to a little church that I went to high school in Illinois, and remember the person who was singing it and everything else. And so I'm really suddenly 16 years old again. And that's the power of Christmas. It wipes away the years. We become childlike. We can actually get in touch with people that we have lost through memories. We can smell grandma's cooking maybe and see the table and remember what the lights look like on her cedar tree. In my case, my grandmother always had blue lights on a cedar tree. But it's music that does that. Name another time of the year, including a religious holiday like Easter, when music comes back for weeks and weeks at a time and allows us to revisit our youth and our past. And I think that is the power of Christmas. And I think it's one of the reasons I celebrate that Christmas has been so commercialized, because now we get 6, 8 weeks of that music. We just don't get a week or two of that music. And we get to celebrate Christ's birth for, 2 months. I mean, that's a big deal. And it's also opens up an opportunity for all of us because thanks to commercialization, it's Christmas all over the world. My books have been translated into Chinese. You can buy them in mainland China
Wow.
and find out about the real meaning behind these carols or the real meaning behind the traditions of Christmas. And that opens the door for us to share what Christmas really means, which is Christ worship, or worship Christ, if you reverse the Mass to first.
So, Ace, explain why it took Brenda Lee so long to get that song to number one. Did it appear in some commercial movie or something that popularized it and got it?
No, it just came back every year. It was not a hit the first 2 years she recorded it. It only sold a few thousand copies. I think 10,000 total in the first 2 years.
Okay.
And then she had a series of other hits, including "I'm Sorry," and suddenly she was hot, and that song took off the third Christmas. But it only made it to number two. And over the years, that song consistently appeared in the top 10, but never hit the vaulted number one spot. And last year, it knocked Mariah Carey out of number one and became the number one Christmas song on the Billboard charts, not just in the United States, but throughout the world.
Mm-hmm. Ace Collins
And
is my.
so that was written, by the way, by Johnny Marks, wrote that song, and he gave us two other huge Christmas hits as well. And one of them's "Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer," which is from the story that his brother-in-law wrote, Bob Day. And the other is Holly Jolly Christmas, that has made Burl Ives a Hollywood icon. And
That's
we
for
would have
sure.
forgotten Burl Ives without Holly Jolly Christmas,
Yeah.
too.
Oh, yeah. Boy, I can see Burl Ives singing that one. All right.
Yeah.
Ace Collins is my guest. Learn more about him at acecollins.com. Stories behind the great songs of Christmas is a book you just need to pull out every year, have on your coffee table. Let's talk about Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, Ace.
Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas is, a huge hit by Judy Garland. I recommend people to dial into Sydney Christmas, who just this year won Britain's Got Talent, an amazing vocalist, and she has put out a new version of that song as well that you can find by Googling it. And her version is different than Judy's, but it's effective as well. Judy did not want to record that song initially because the songwriters had included a line that she did not like. That was a World War II movie, Meet Me in St. Louis, that it was written for. And Judy was just did not like the line, you know, uh, in the first verse about, you know, this may be our Christmas last. Next year, we may be celebrating in the past, or something along those lines. And she thought it was too much of a downer for people during World War II who were
Mm-hmm.
separated by war. And so she had them change it to more upbeat lyrics before she would record it. Now, those lyrics would have fit real well with the plot of Meet Me in St. Louis, but I think it became a hit. One of three songs that were released in World War II that we still listen to today because of when it was released, and that being World War II and people being separated, and Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, White Christmas, and I'll Be Home for Christmas all became kind of secular prayers for a reunification of family and hoping that there would someday be peace on earth again. Uh, Judy's version is one that it's kind of like Nat King Cole singing the 1946 song uh, written by Mel Torme and Robert Wells, which is just called the Christmas song.
Mm-hmm.
Chestnuts roasting on an open fire. I don't think you can have Christmas without Judy and Nat and Bing singing the songs I just mentioned. I mean,
And
I don't think Christmas can officially start, not just here, but around the world without those three songs.
it's so good. When you were during the golden era, now you've got these movie studio executives and they've got songwriting teams and they're writing songs, but they're working in sync with the artist that's going to be singing them. In this case, Judy Garland, and she had feedback about lines she didn't like. I
Yeah,
was surprised to hear that's the way it was working back then.
it was. As a matter of fact, people will find this very unusual. It's Irving Berlin brought the musical score to Holiday Inn to Bing Crosby in 1941. And in early December, he listened to the music, and Berlin said, "Hey, I really wrote some good music, but my Christmas song is just horrible. I'll play it for you, but it doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't do anything for the movie." And he played the Christmas song, telling Bing he didn't want to use it in the movie. Bing heard it and said, "No, we're keeping it just like it is." And it was White Christmas. But Berlin, the songwriter, thought it was a lousy song. He didn't think it was up to his standards. Bing recognized the absolute wonder of White Christmas. And then just a few weeks after hearing it on December 25th, 1941, 3 weeks after America entered the Second World War, when America was rattled and wondering, can we win this thing on two fronts? And how many people are going to be lost? And you were having wives say goodbye to husbands and mothers and fathers say goodbye to children. He sang that song for the first time a long, long time before that movie was to be released. And so he had not planned on actually cutting that song till late 1942 and recorded it. I mean, actually sang it live on the radio in 41. And the NBC switchboard lit up. I mean, they wanted to hear it again and again and again. And so that song became a hit before it was ever recorded. White Christmas did.
I was hearing something
Yeah.
about the story of Irving Berlin, and it really is quite fascinating. His family came to the United States and ended up landing at Ellis Island in about 1901, and there were
Mhm.
7 kids in the family, and I think his dad died when he was young, and he had basically dropped out of school by the time he was 12 or 13.
He
And
worked at every job in the world that he could find and then wrote songs on the side.
I
Yeah.
know. And he didn't feel like he could bring enough money into the family, so he ran away from home when he was about 13. And that was it.
He
He took
did.
care of himself after that.
Worked in restaurants and everything else, and eventually became a Tin Pan Alley songsmith,
Yeah.
selling songs cheaply. And that he was such a genius at it. It's also unusual how much he loved Christmas because he was a Jewish man.
Yeah. A
And
Russian
yet
Jew.
his friends were all Christians, and he absolutely fell in love with the tree and the music and all of the other things that were associated with the holidays. And so, therefore, he loved writing Christmas music. I
Hmm.
mean, he decorated the tree. Everything in his house looked like Christmas long before he wrote White Christmas.
Yeah. And died in 1989 at age 101. So he had a nice long
Uh,
life.
yes, he did. Probably the greatest songwriter of popular music
Yeah.
of the last century.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Ace Collins is my guest. We're going to take a short break. We'd love to hear what is your favorite Christmas song if you're interested in hearing the background on it. I bet Ace would know, but give it a shot. 877-933-2484. His amazing book, I Have It, I Love It. It comes out every Christmas, and I know you're going to love it as well. Stories behind the great songs of Christmas. Let me make sure I get the title right. Stories behind the best loved songs of Christmas. There we go. We'll be right back. You've probably heard me talk about hope quite a bit this season, and I think it's because we need to hear more about it. We need to encourage one another with hope. We need to build one another up with the hope that we have in Christ. And if you are feeling lonely, or maybe you are having periods of disappointment or despair, and you need hope, we want you to know that you can always come to God's Word for hope. Hope will always be there for you, waiting. And if you are struggling to make it to the next moment, text the word HOPE to 877-933-2484. So glad to have one of two conversations I'm going to have this December with Ace Collins. He's written over 100 books. The one we're chatting about today is Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. And once I sent that ask out, the first one that popped up on the text line, Ace, was Silent Night. And I know I'm an easy cry, but every time I hear that, here come the tears.
We shouldn't even know this song. I mean, seriously, this song was a stopgap measure. I mean, a young priest in his early 20s, assigned to his first Christmas Eve Mass in Obendorf, Austria, had planned the entire service around music, and he got to the church and the organ didn't work. Most people kind of know that background story. They think mice ate the bellows. No, that wasn't it. It was just an old organ that had been going out for a while. And he was in a panic. He rushed across town to his friend Franz Gruber, who was a a school teacher, and Joseph Moore said, what are we going to do? And Gruber offered to play guitar with the music, and Moore said, no, the music doesn't work with guitar. And so Gruber suggested they write something, and that is when Moore remembered that 3 years before, and this is over 200 years ago now, but 3 years before, when he was visiting an uncle, he had walked through a snow-covered meadow and woods at night and been inspired to write a poem. What is amazing to me, knowing myself, is he was able to rush back to his office and find that poem he had written 3 years before. Uh, I probably would have had to dig for a week to find it, but he found it. He immediately knew where it was. He brought it back to Gruber. They set it to music, and that song, Silent Night, became the song that saved that Christmas Eve service in Obendorf, Austria that night.
Mm.
Well, 3 weeks later, the guy who fixes organs came by to fix the organ, and he asked the priest, well, what did y'all do for music? He probably didn't say y'all just like I did, but he said, what did you do for music? And they said, well, we played guitar and sang a song that we had written. And he said, can I hear it? And this guy was so impressed with the song, he wrote down all the lyrics to Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, and then learned the music. Well, imagine this priest now. 40 years later, he has walking down a street in Cologne, Germany. He's now an old man. And from this cathedral, he hears his song. Well, he hasn't even been singing his song for all these years. He hasn't been using it in his churches. So how did these people know it? And lo and behold, the guy who came to fix the organ became the Johnny Appleseed of Silent Night. And but by the time the priest found out that it was being played everywhere, it had been translated into 30 different languages and was the most sung Christmas carol of that time period.
Mm.
And by the way, it's still the most sung Christmas carol of all time. I call it the Jesus Love Me of Christmas carols. That is an amazing story, that a song that was never intended for publication, no one ever sought out publishing rights for it, became the most beloved Christmas song, Christmas carol anyway, of all time. By the way, what was the name of the church 200 years ago, a little more than 200 years ago, that song was first performed in? St. Nicholas.
That was the name of the church.
Yeah.
Oh, my.
So Silent Night was first performed in the St. Nicholas Church in Obendorf, Austria. And it was a one-time only stopgap measure to save a service that mushroomed into something else because a guy took that song and taught it to everyone he knew over the course of the next 40 years.
So the moral of the story is, when the organ stops working, don't panic.
Don't panic. I guess that's the moral of the story, and be thankful that they decided to fix the organ, because that's the reason we know that song.
Yeah.
After all of these years. By the way, you mentioned the book a while ago. I want to mention that if you go online and order the Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas, order it in the green cover version. I love the blue cover version, which was the original version. There's no difference in the two books other than the fact the blue cover version has become a collector's item and they charge a whole lot for it. And you can get the green covered version for a normal retail price.
Okay.
And so save yourself money, get these same stories and get the green cover version at your booksellers, not the blue cover version.
All right. I just got another text, Ace Collins. It says, I read my stories behind the best loved Christmas songs every year, and I give it as gifts every year. My hairstylist is getting the one wrapped on my counter right now.
That book has sold over 1 million copies. By the way, for your listeners out there that get discouraged after somebody rejects them into sharing their faith, or someone rejects an idea they have, that book, I shopped that book for 10 years, and it was actually rejected by 27 publishers before we found a home. And it was the book that sold over 1 million copies and hit number 3 on the best-selling charts and that first year. And so never give up on a good idea. Also, never, just because you get a rejection, give up on sharing what's important to you with other people.
Ace, was that the book that after you had established a relationship with the publisher, they suggested that you write a book about the best love songs of Christmas, and you said, hey, I already submitted that idea like a long time ago?
No, actually, I had written, they suggested initially I write a book about the stories behind gospel music's greatest songs, which I did, called Turn the Radio On. And then they came back to me after that book went into its 4th printing and said, is there anything else we rejected we should have bought? And that's when I got a chance to pitch this.
Oh, that's very funny. All right. Ace Collins is my guest, and his book is Stories Behind the Best Love Songs of Christmas. If you have a song you just love at Christmas time and it's just one of your favorites, send me over what song it is, and I'll ask Ace if he knows its background. 877-933-2484. Ace, talk about Good King Wenceslas.
Good King Wenceslas is an interesting tale because it is about an actual person. It's about a guy whose name was not Wenceslas. He was a duke from Bohemia, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his name. You can read it in the book. But this duke had a habit. He was a very young leader, had a habit on Christmas Eve of going out into the poorest of the poor in his community and delivering food and firewood and clothing to them. And he would do that. I mean, this is the 1500s. He would, over 1,000 years ago, rather. He would do that each and every Christmas that he was alive. And so his Christmas visits to the people who really were the least of these became legendary in Bohemia, and other people started imitating him. And so the song is written about this guy who was technically a duke, not a king, who delivered Christmas presents to his subjects who were very, very poor. And he and a guy who was a Catholic bishop and cardinal back in the 300s in Turkey named Nicholas are the basis. These two Christian men are the basis of Santa Claus.
That's amazing.
So
Yeah.
and so if you looked at the DNA of Santa Claus, you would find both Wenceslaus or the Duke in this case, and Nicholas of Baria.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Ace, let me go to another one of my very favorite, probably in my top three, and that's "O Holy Night."
There's not just one great story behind this song. There's a bunch. I mean, "O Holy Night" was written in 1840. It was written as an assignment. A man in a community in France had been given the assignment by the local parish priest to write a poem for the Christmas Eve service. He wrote that poem on a carriage trip to France. He was so taken by what he had written, he took it to a friend of his who was an opera writer and asked him if he would set it to music. The friend did not feel really like he was equipped to set the song to music, but they had a discussion, and eventually the poet won him over. The song was set to music, and it was sung in the church. And within 5 years, that song had swept France as the best loved Christmas carol in the country. And then the Catholic Church at that time kicked the song out of services because they found out the man who wrote the music was Jewish.
Oh, wow.
So they decided it was secular for that reason. Well, it still was sung by people in their homes, and it made its way to England. It was translated to English, and then it made its way to America in about 1850. But it came to America not as a Christmas song, but as a part of the abolitionist movement, because the third verse has a line, chains shall he break, because the slave is our brother. In his name all oppression shall cease. It was after the Civil War that it became a Christmas song in the United States, and a much beloved Christmas song. A few years after that, the Franco-Prussian War was going on, and a man jumped out of a foxhole, started singing "O Holy Night." It was answered by "Silent Night," and suddenly the two sides did create peace on earth with a truce for 24 hours and celebrated Christmas together. By the way, that happened again in World War II and World War One, if you've heard that story, with the same two songs.
Mm-hmm.
Then finally, in 1906, a man named Fessenden, who was a man who had worked for Marconi at one time, knew Edison, did something that both men told him was impossible, and that is create a transmitter that was powerful enough to transmit the human voice. And these people who were listening to speakers on ships at sea in that area and newsrooms and weather bureaus for the Morse code on Christmas Eve, 1906, heard Fedison read the second chapter of Luke and then pick up his violin. And the first song ever played on the radio was "O Holy Night."
Oh, wow. I mean, ever. The first first song ever transmitted on a radio airwave was "O Holy Night."
And we've been introducing Christmas music, new Christmas songs on radio ever since. So,
wow, that's incredible. All right, Ace, let me take a short break. I've got lots of songs being asked about. Ace Collins is my guest. His book is called Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. If you go shopping for one, get the green cover. You'll save a few bucks. And you can learn more about that at wherever you like to buy books. We'll take a short break and be right back.
It's the afternoon show with Bill Arno. Prime time, drive time. Let's get it started. Jump in your car. Yeah. What's for dinner? Hey. It's the afternoon show with Bill Arno.
I sure love Christmas music, and one of my favorite December traditions is getting a chance to talk to Ace Collins not once but twice, and this is number one of two. Today we're talking about stories behind the best loved songs of Christmas, and it's a book that he has written a while ago that's sold over 1 million copies, and I'm always glad to be talking about these songs that I have enjoyed my whole life, and then you hear more of the background of these songs, and they just mean more to you. So another request that just came in, Ace, is "Joy to the World." There's always there's an exclamation mark at the end of that. I love that.
You know, and "Joy to the World" is one of those songs that we talked earlier about songs you cannot go through Christmas without hearing, and "Joy to the World" is one of those songs. I mean, you have to have it, and when you combine one of the greatest hymn writers of all time, Isaac Watts, with a master tune with a master composer, you get ultimately one of the great Christmas songs of all time. I love the story of Watts because Watts did not, his father was a preacher, and Watts constantly complained as a teenager about how boring church services were. And they sang the same songs over and over again. They were
Uh-huh.
all songs from the Psalms with about 5 or 6 different tunes. And Watts's father told him as a 16-year-old, if you can do better, then do better. And Watts started writing music that totally revolutionized the way that Protestants did music in church. He actually wrote hymns for the first time that were original hymns. And so, and he is the one who studied the Bible diligently and came up really based on looking forward to a Savior, Old Testament text, if you will, this wonderful song, Joy to the World. They sang it for quite a while in the church at Christmas time in his father's church. And then about 40, 50 years later, Lowell Mason from New Jersey, who was a choir director, actually wrote the music that we sing to it to this day. And this is like, so people have been singing the hymn in this format, in this way now for over 300 years. And it is one of the oldest Christmas songs that we sing, not near the oldest. The oldest that we sing in its entirety is, gosh, 1100 years old now. But this song, Joy to the World, with its upbeat music, I think is an anthem of birth that is like no other ever released. It's to the masterful ability of Watts to not just rhyme words, but to also take scripture and translate it into a personal testimony that each of us can relate to. So it's the masterful nature of Isaac Watts that made this song so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Ace, what about the little drummer boy? Do you know anything on that?
Oh yeah, it was written by a piano teacher from Wellesley College at the time, and it was written during the Depression when people had very little money for gifts, and she was watching the poverty engulf the country and combined that view with an European tradition of a child who played an instrument for Jesus in the manger. That was a legend in Europe. And in this case, she decided to make it a little drummer boy. And she pitched it after she wrote it to several different people. The first group that ever recorded it on a record that had any kind of success at all was the Van Trapp family, the same family that The Sound of Music was written about.
Sure.
But they couldn't get a hit on it. And it would be 30 years after it was written, 25 years after it was written, that the Harry Simeon Chorale recorded a version in the late 50s. And in the midst of rock and roll, this song was released on rock and roll stations and just climbed the charts. And so sometimes, once again, you have to wait for success. And so here's a song born of the Depression that came to life in the midst of the Cold War. And it was magical in the way that it told the story of this is all I have. And sometimes that's far more than enough if you decide to give it. I teach my college kids every Sunday night when I do home group, the best gift you can give is the acceptance of others and providing value to others. This is a song that shows the value in individuals giving of themselves in with the talents they have. It's not big, it's not earth splashing, but it does change one life at a time. By the way, the Harry Simeon Chorale then turned around and recorded "Do You Hear What I Hear" 2 years later for another major hit. And that song was written by a Frenchman who came to the United States and fell in love with a piano player in the lobby of a New York hotel who spoke no French. And somehow they fell in love, even though they didn't speak each other's languages, and ended up writing Carol, Do You Hear What I Hear? And their names were, I love this, their names were the man Noel and the woman Gloria.
I love stories behind the songs. This is great. Ace Collins is my guest. His book is Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. Ace, what can we learn about O Come, Emmanuel?
It's the oldest song in its entirety that we still sing. We don't know who wrote it. It was written by some monk years and years ago. Obviously, it's called, the O song because every verse begins with an O, both in Latin and English as we sing it. It's a very easy song to sing, one of the easiest of all songs to sing. Compare singing this to, which I think has 7 different notes, to "O Holy Night," which strains your vocal cords, and you can tell that this is an old Latin song made to be sung in church with people who were very simple people with a very simple musical instrument. And if you listen real closely, you can go back to those old stone churches and hear those monks singing it in its original form. And to think that a song that was written probably around 900, 950 is still out there and alive and something that we sing to this day is a testament to the power of the season. By the way, there's another song that we sing part of that is even older, and that's Gloria in Excelsis Deus. There was an edict written in 130, and we didn't start celebrating Christmas on December 25th until 200 years later, about 330 was when that date was defined. But in 130 AD, one of the church leaders gave an edict that said, after the reading of the Gospel of Luke, 2nd chapter, all of the congregation should sing Gloria in Excelsis Deus. So part of that song existed in 130 AD. And if you think about it, songs were passed along orally. They weren't published back then. And that meant that song had to be kind of old at that particular point for all the congregations to know it. So it doesn't stretch your imagination much to think that the person who wrote some of those lyrics may have actually witnessed Jesus as a person walking the earth.
Mm-hmm. Ace Collins is my guest. His book is Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. What about I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day? I love that song, and I love hearing bells, which I don't think we hear very much of anymore in America.
No, and it was right after at the end of the Civil War when Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote that song, and he wrote it in the midst of despair. Many of his students, he was a professor in college, had not come back from the war or had come back crippled, including one of his own sons, had come back with horrendous injuries. Just a few months before he sat down and wrote this song, his wife had died horribly in a fire. She was lighting a candle and her nightgown caught on fire.
Oh my.
So he was not in a mood to celebrate the Christmas season. And he sat down on Christmas Day to write the poem. And if you read the first few verses, they are downers. I mean, and then suddenly he hears the bells on Christmas Day, and God is not dead, nor doth he sleep, is one of the lines that's written in there. And you can see his reawakening of faith. And it is a song about depression turned to exuberance, about lost faith refound. And it's really a testament not just to Watt's ability to bear his soul to us, but it's also his ability to put us all into a part of spiritual life that we, at one time or another, we all struggle. We all lose our faith. We all question, can God hear me? And then there's something, a spark somewhere, in this case, the bells, that reawakens that connection with God. And so it's a masterful testimony for a man who was suffering, who once again found his faith, but it's also a masterful telling of the darkness in the world before Christ was born and the light that came into that world at that birth.
Mm-hmm. Ace Collins is my guest. We're going to take a little break and come right back. His book is Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. We'll be right back. We carry each other's burdens. Please know you can bring us your prayer concerns and we will pray. Share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio team by texting or calling 877-933-2484 or share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio staff and listeners at myfaithradio.com. I love the traditions of Christmas songs, and I also love the tradition of talking to Ace Collins every December. We've been doing this for years, and I always find it fascinating. Wyatt and I were just talking during the break. It's really fun to hear the stories behind these songs of Christmas, and that's the name of his book, Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas. Ace Collins is my guest. Ace, talk about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. This is really one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, Bob May was a copywriter who was living in Chicago in a tenement apartment, a two-room apartment, with his wife and his 4-year-old daughter, Barbara. His wife was suffering from cancer and was not in good shape, and it's her medical bills that placed them on the wrong side of Chicago. And the little girl evidently felt cheated because she had never known her mother healthy, and so she climbed up into Bob's lap and asked him the question one November night, why can't my mommy be like all the other mommies in the world? And Bob wanted his daughter to know a little bit about his wife's personality. And so he injected her personality along with a touch of his into a character and made up a story for the little girl. And she wanted that story again the next night, so he embellished it some more. And he had no money for a Christmas gift. And so what he did was he used his skill as an artist, and he drew pictures to go with the words of his story. And the last few pages are tear-stained because his wife dies of cancer. And people are coming to their apartment on Christmas Day, not with glad tidings, but to mourn. And Barbara, though, is so excited about the book that her dad has given her that she shows it to everyone. And one of the people he worked with in the copywriting copywriting job at this large company, said, you need to read this at the company New Year's Eve party. He did, and the head of the company bought all rights for the book. And that moved Bob to a nice section of town where he could raise his daughter and begin life again. And meanwhile, for the next 7 years, every child that sat in Santa's lap in this company's department stores got a copy of this book. Well, Bob got remarried, and when he got remarried, his new brother-in-law was a songwriter. And the brother-in-law said, hey, let's write a song about, your character. And Bob explained, well, I don't own the rights anymore. Well, they went to the head of Montgomery Ward, who gave them the rights to the book back.
Oh,
and
wow.
And which wouldn't have happened in today's corporate world, but they did. And they wrote the song. Bing Crosby had already had 3 Christmas hits, turned it down. Dinah Shore, who wanted a Christmas hit, she had charted over 400 times, turned it down. Bob Hope, who desperately wanted a song that was a Christmas hit to basically challenge his best friend Bing Crosby, turned it down. Another singer-actor turned it down as well until his wife heard it and said, Gene Autry, you got to cut the song about the reindeer nobody will play with. and that song, I think, is a wonderful example of Christmas in so many different ways, because it was a gift given with love when the man had nothing else to give.
Mm-hmm.
He gave his talent, and he gave a gift given with love, and that gift came back magnified to the giver time and time again. It also kept the personality and the spirit of a woman that a child never knew and kept it alive.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I hear the story, Ace, and I just find myself choking back the tears.
I actually was autographing books one time, and it was at the Louise Mandrell Theater in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee in 2006. And I had a lady come through with 4 kids, and she got a book for each one of the kids. And we'd autographed 400 and some odd books that night, and she waited till last. And she asked for a picture, and then she hugged me and she said, thank you for telling that story on stage tonight, and thank you for writing it in the book, because now I know my kids will never forget me. Every time they hear Rudolph, they'll remember their mom loved them. And I asked her the story why she said that, and she was dying of cancer, and she would die 3 or 4 months later. I got a notification from one of her relatives, but she was going to tell those kids the story of Rudolph and remind them that every time they heard Rudolph, they would feel their mother's love. And so
Oh,
I think I kind of went through all the rejections and kept pitching that book for that lady and her four children. Yeah.
beautiful. Ace Collins is my guest. Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs of Christmas is his book. Ace, what about Do You Hear What I Hear?
Yeah, we mentioned it earlier with Noel and Gloria writing
Yeah.
that song. We mentioned a little bit of the backstory. The song was inspired because Noel had been in France as a young man and had many of his family members put into concentration camps. He saw many others killed during the war, and with the growth of the Vietnam War, along coupled to what had happened in Korea, he his hopes had given out. He didn't think there would ever be peace on earth, and so he and his wife sat down and fleshed out his feelings and his heartache into that song and gave us one of the great Christmas carols of all time. When it came out, it was not unusual for people hearing it the first time to pull their car off the side of the road and just sit there in their car and listen to that song the first time it played out. That is the huge impact it made in the early 1960s.
Oh, that's powerful. Another song I just love is Away in a Manger.
Away in the Manger was written by not Martin Luther, even though it's called Luther's Cradle Song. It was written several hundred years after Luther died, even though they have now, they have acting people playing Luther writing that song. He didn't write it. It was written by a Dutch or a Pennsylvania farmer, probably with a Dutch or a German background in the late 1800s in America. It's actually an American carol. We don't know who wrote it. But we do surmise he was a farmer. We do know he was from Pennsylvania. But when they published it, they called it Luther's Cradle Hymn, and that's where all of the misinformation began.
All right. That is, I appreciate that as well. All right. We just have a couple minutes left. And God rest ye merry gentlemen. I don't know if I understand or if I remember all the fine details of that song.
Oh yeah, I mean it's funny because that's the first song I actually did a story behind because I've been confused since I was a child about that
Okay,
song.
good. Not just me.
Why would God want happy people to sleep? I thought it was older people getting kids to go to bed. I didn't know, but when I went back and researched that song, it was written about anywhere from 500 to 700 years ago in Old England, and we don't know the peasant who wrote it. But the word make or keep back then, God rest ye merry gentlemen, also meant rest. And so he was writing probably saying God make, not God rest. And if you actually think about it, God make you merry makes sense now. I mean, as opposed to God rest you merry. No, it's God make you merry. And by the way, 700 years ago, I get asked this question on the BBC all the time. Why do we in Britain say Happy Christmas and y'all say Merry Christmas? Well, the reason is 700 years ago, merry didn't mean just happy, and to be merry, you had to be wealthy because you had a tough life if you were a peasant, and so merry also meant mighty. It meant wealthy. It meant strong. Merry old England, strongest nation in the world. And so Robin Hood and his merry men, they weren't happy because they were out in the wet forest. They were mighty men. So we probably should be singing God rest ye merry gentlemen this way. And this is the way it was originally intended. God make you mighty gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ your Savior was born on Christmas Day. So I sign all my Christmas autographs, Mighty Christmas.
Oh, love it. Love it. All right, Ace, we're running out of time, but you get a private one-song concert, any artist, living or dead, singing any Christmas song. Who would it be?
Right now, Sydney Christmas, the Britain's Got Talent winner, singing Oh Holy Night. She does an incredible job on that song. That album came out about a month ago. And I recommend people seek that out or have yourself a Merry Christmas. Sydney Christmas at Christmas this year is special.
Nice.
And it really is.
I
I
appreciate
cannot believe, by the way, the hour has gone this fast.
No, it just flies by, yeah. So we're going to talk to you again later in the month, and we're going to talk about the best loved traditions of Christmas. So I always look forward to this time with you. Thank you for taking time, and thank you for all of your wealth of information and how beautifully you tell these stories. I appreciate you.
Have a mighty Christmas.
Yeah, Mighty Christmas to you. Ace Collins has been my guest. Stories behind the best love songs of Christmas. We're going to take a little break, and then I want you to start thinking about what you're going to be doing for a Bible study next year. You got to start thinking about it right now. John Stewart's going to join me in studio. We're going to talk about a discipleship Bible study called Lamplighters. Be right back. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.